Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll cover how the FBI infiltrated and exposed LulzSec and was possibly the tech story of the year. Plus, a Microsoft war story that ends in them missing more than just a leap day, and we'll answer some viewer questions. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 48 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. This episode was streamed live on March 8th, and this episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. The live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is fantastic. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, man. Welcome to episode 48. We're right on to the march. I guess 52 is really the one we have our eye on the most. But still, we march right along on a weekly basis. And what a week it has been. So, I foolishly, I admit this, I kind of made the retarded assumption, and I apologize, I don't mean to offend, but it was really just, it was slow thinking on my part that we had seen the end of the whole hacking stories with Anonymous and LulzSec, but this week has proved to be so fruitful, full of amazing and fascinating stories in that whole world. We're definitely going to talk about that today, so I can't wait to do that. In fact, I think that's our top story. But before
the second story too.
And the second story, and then there's a follow-up story in the roundup, and they're all just they're just really great stories. So I can't wait to share them with you guys. But before we get going, I want to make mention over at JupiterBroadcasting.com. If you scroll all the way down to the very bottom of the site, you will find that we have these affiliate links down here, and we have them for Amazon US, UK, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, which is free, Audible.com, which I love, and now thanks to Rikai in our chat room and Scooter, we have a Chrome extension, and this Chrome extension, if you use Chrome, will automatically tag your shopping session for all of the sites that I just mentioned for you when you're there. You don't even have to think about it, and then a little portion of your purchase doesn't cost you anything more, goes to Jupiter Broadcasting. And I want to thank everyone who does that, and sincerely, I mean that. Whenever you see an episode of any show on Jupiter Broadcasting that doesn't have two sponsors in it, that means it's relying on your contributions to finance the production of that episode. And that's a great way to do that, because while you're getting yourself something, you can get us a little something. And I think, who doesn't love Amazon, right? And so you just, just go there first before you start shopping.
It doesn't cost you anything extra, so.
Yeah. And, of course, donations and monthly donations are also a big part of that. If you're not doing
it, you're throwing money away, and that's rude.
Right. Well, and some people just choose to donate directly, and that's also much appreciated.
Yes,
because it's really helpful.
But who doesn't shop at Amazon at some point?
I know, I love Amazon. I've been an Amazon Prime member for years. All right, Alan, well, enough self-plugging. I know we've got a ton of great news that we want to cover this week. So why don't we talk about this top story that really is the king of all of the stories, and that's this whole FBI arrest and then coercion of, I guess Sabu might be, Subu might be how you pronounce his name, but essentially he was the quote-unquote leader of the LulzSec movement, and he was a turncoat, it turned out, for months, and the FBI have been tracking a whole bunch of people. I mean, it's just an incredible story. Take it away, Alan. I don't know where you want to start with it.
So, Hector Xavier Mansurgur, I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name.
Yeah, it's a little rough.
But basically, he was arrested in June of 2011, so the FBI showed up at his house and arrested him, and he lives there with his two small children, and he was worried about them having someone to take care of them or whatever. So he struck a deal with the FBI and basically rolled over and started helping them instead in order to, gain favor as far as sentencing.
Yeah, a lot of the news reports that have ran about this too have painted him almost always with the description as unemployed, living in the projects, or unemployed father of two. It's been kind of an interesting take on that. And it does sound like that was sort of the motivation that the FBI used to get him to cooperate was.
Yes, like they said, he didn't do it easily, but at some point, when they leveraged his kids against him, he gave in.
Gosh, that's pretty wild. I mean, just to take something like that, to take somebody who's at the beginning of the movement and be able to flip him like that is pretty substantial. Now, it sounds like some members already were kind of suspicious, but not everybody was suspicious.
This has been going on since June, obviously, and so after a certain point, some people got suspicious. But he pled guilty to a number of charges, including conspiracy to engage in computer hacking, as part of Anonymous, as part of LulzSec, and as part of another group called Internet Feds. And also directly linked to hacking of HB Gary, Fox News, Sony Pictures, the PBS website, and InfraGard Atlantic, which was the NATO website that we had covered previously.
And the HB Gary story, pretty interesting.
Yeah. And then also computer hacking in furtherance of fraud, conspiracy to commit access device fraud, which is security tokens or access cards and that kind of thing, and also conspiracy to commit bank fraud.
Yeah, I guess he'd gotten like some sort of transportation pass and was boasting that he could just clone them however he wanted and he could get free transportation, and that if he was in San Francisco, he could be doing that down there too, and he could be making tons of money selling them.
There's a lot of electronic bus passes and so on that are stored value cards, and if you cheat the system, you can ride free. It's mostly a design flaw in the system, but yes, it's still against the law to do that.
Yep.
And then aggravated identity theft as well. There's not much detail on that one, but
yeah, I'm sure identity theft is kind of lumped in there because of all kinds of things. Because using other people's credit cards, things like that.
Yeah. So his complicity with the authorities has been suspected for a while, and that led to some members of LulzSec doing a process called doxing, which is basically publishing documents about the person.
Right.
And basically, this is all of the information that they had collected about him, which includes things like his real name, aliases he uses, handles he goes by, what his instant messenger login names are, his Twitter account, where his blogs are, websites he runs.
Well, and I guess in another...
he's written and published, pictures of him, all that kind of stuff.
Another competing hacking group back when the LulzSec movement was really kind of at its height, because really LulzSec had kind of faded out and sort of been absorbed back into general Anonymous by the time all of this went down.
If you remember when we talked about it, they talked about getting out while they were ahead.
Yeah. So there was a group that I guess had doxed him a couple of months, or no, I'm sorry, I might have the timing on that wrong.
Ago from now.
They had doxed him before he was arrested by the FBI, and the FBI were actually forced because of that to step up their... they had already had him under investigation, and because he got doxed by another competing hacking group, the FBI stepped up their arrest of him a lot sooner or something along those lines. It's kind of a little interesting thing. So I guess at one point he was kind of already exposed, but I guess people hadn't really cared.
Yeah. But I'm sure also some people might be wondering, why he would maybe disclose some of this information to the other hackers. But depending on the structure of the organization and the group and so on, a lot of times it's like a requirement to join a group. Because you're going to... They have no reason to trust you. They basically take collateral against you. Right? If you're going to be doing illegal things with people you don't know very well, you need to have some leverage over them.
Huh. I guess so. So what do you think, Alan? This story unravels down a couple of different interesting paths. I'm just kind of curious what your...
The first one is the fact that the FBI continued letting the operation run rather than just announcing that they had arrested the leader of LulzSec.
Right. And there was some pretty significant hacks that took place while the FBI was watching.
Yes. So he gave a number of interviews. The other things that happened while he was under the control of the FBI was that he gave a number of interviews to reporters and was directed by the FBI to feed them misinformation.
Right. Okay. I mean, I guess they can claim that it was all part of an investigation, an ongoing investigation or something like that. Huh.
Yeah, well, there's nothing that says that the FBI has to tell reporters the truth.
Well, they
can't stop reporters from investigating.
They were also watching him at that time that the FBI conference call was hacked. And he was actually in the FBI office when he went back in the IRC, and they were all patting themselves on the back on the kind of exposure they were getting over the story. And he was in there like, yeah, FBI. And he's in their office doing it.
Yeah. The FBI also alerted more than 300 companies and organizations and agencies to potential vulnerabilities that were being discovered as Anonymous was looking for their next target. So, there was a number of places that might have got hacked into if the FBI hadn't alerted them that Anonymous was poking around at their security.
Yeah, the question was, is Stratford one of them? Since that's the story we covered last week.
Yes. So Stratfor was one of the other things that the FBI did was they provided Sabu with a server, and on which he directed members of LulzSec to use to dump the stolen information. So, for example, copies of the Stratfor emails and credit card numbers and all that stolen data, and a bunch of other different things.
Yeah, this is pretty wild. So just to back up again, what you're saying there is the FBI provided them with essentially a dumping ground to harvest, well, as they were harvesting all of this intelligent data from Stratford that leaked out via WikiLeaks, they needed a place to store all that. In fact, there was even a quote, like a tweet that went out where somebody said, "We've just had this massive hack and we have so much stuff to store, we don't know where we can put it all." And then this server comes along and provides that place to store it all, and they're just tossing all this stuff on there. And then it goes from that server to WikiLeaks. And that server is the FBI server.
That connection was never made. It's never been shown whether that data went directly from that server to WikiLeaks, or if it was a different copy.
Okay,
well, because there's an entire conspiracy theory around the fact that if the copy that went to WikiLeaks was directly from the FBI server, could the FBI have modified the information or withheld certain parts of the?
That seems a little silly.
Yeah. Well,
to me,
yeah, exactly. If the FBI had control of it, they would have prevented it from being leaked. Period.
It almost seems like it was intentionally allowed to be leaked to bring Stratford down in some capacity or something like that. I mean, because it seems like the amount of stuff that was
the FBI's job, though.
No, I wouldn't think so. I don't know, but it seems. Do you think we live in a world where the FBI would have all of this intelligence data on their own server and just let criminals release it?
It wasn't a server at the FBI. It was a regular server out on the internet that the FBI was paying for indirectly.
But probably theoretically, I mean, when you host a server and you pay for it, you get the root account. It's your server. You own it. I mean, you can.
But if you're letting a bunch of hackers use it, and then they see root logged in from something.fbi.gov, they're going to be like, what the hell's going on?
But on top of that, they had Sabu or Subu or whatever, so they knew what it was. I mean, they knew what it was and what they were doing.
Right, but
it just boggles my mind. I don't.
All right, so if the data gets from Stratfor to their server and they shut that server down to prevent it from getting out, the hackers most likely still have a copy of it somewhere, and it still gets out.
Yeah,
but
maybe
now you've blown your sting.
So maybe they kept their own stash somewhere else.
Right, and that's why I think that the fact that, or the conspiracy theory that the FBI redacted or removed or modified any of the information seems unlikely, because depending on how it was transported, it's most likely didn't come directly from that server.
Well, and there's also some pretty incriminating things in there that you think they would have, if they were censoring, they would have censored them out.
Part of it, again, the conspiracy theory is a lot of it's about misdirection. There's a link in the roundup that talks about their whole conspiracy theory about how the official story is that Osama bin Laden was buried at sea, and then the Stratfor version of the story was that he was brought back to the US and then cremated, but the conspiracy theory is that he wasn't actually killed or whatever. And that by leaking a story that...
So this is a conspiracy theory to cover up a conspiracy theory of a conspiracy?
The conspiracy theory is that in order... So they have the bullshit cover story.
Right, well, so a lot of people think like Osama bin Laden died in 2009. So there's a conspiracy theory that he died in 2009. So what they're saying is there were emails in the Stratford leak that showed that he was flown to the US and cremated and dropped, then buried at sea. And everybody's saying, well, that whole part's a diversion because in reality, we know he was killed in 2009. Is that what you're saying? Right? I think so.
That's not their theory, but
okay,
something to that effect. So basically that the whole cremation thing was planted at Stratfor so it would be leaked so that it would be believed. So that people would stop looking for the actual truth by thinking that, all right, so what we told everybody was the public knowledge is a lie,
right?
But here's the fake secret. And that's what everybody will believe because the bigger conspiracy is bigger.
Well, I'll let the folks on the internet figure that one out. And I'll tune back in a future date. But I find this story incredibly fascinating, just because some of the damage that's been done was technically under the watch of the FBI, or however you slice it. And I don't know how law enforcement works, and so it very well may be that they just simply have to monitor them, monitor them doing some of these acts in order to bust them.
Well,
maybe.
Yeah, it's
Seems like at a certain point you'd have enough evidence that you would once they've breached Stratford, why not just
Stratford? There's no D in it. Stratford's the name of a place.
I'm pronouncing the T at the end. Stratford. Not putting a D in. I'm putting a T in.
There's no E. Stratford.
Whatever. I'm just okay. Shaka laka laka.
Yeah, there's no T at the end.
I just wonder. I don't know. I just wonder why they couldn't have stopped them before it got that far.
Maybe, well, if they don't have the person's identity and location, they can't arrest them. They could stop them, but they can't catch them. And the FBI's job is to catch you, not to stop you.
So maybe they didn't have their location.
Right? They can't prevent crimes. They can just prosecute crimes.
Yeah. Maybe. Very interesting. God, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
The chat room thinks we ought to create the pronunciation action show. The pronunciation. The pronunciation?
Pronunciation. You had it right the middle time.
I just screwed with you, Alan.
The first time and the last time were wrong. But the middle, you had it right.
Any other thoughts on that story?
It basically bleeds into the second story.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So
take it.
In the second story, attackers managed to breach Sony records and steal a bunch of unreleased music, including the entire collection of unreleased Michael Jackson recordings.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that's a crazy hack.
More than 50,000 files were copied by the attackers, although none of them appear to have been leaked onto the internet, which is kind of strange. Included in that list were all the unreleased tracks from Michael Jackson, which Sony had paid $250 million to his estate for. So yeah, they spent $250 million to buy all these unreleased songs.
Things these people spend money on.
And the rights to sell those. And apparently they still haven't released them or whatever. But they
spend $250 million, and then some hacker just comes in and takes it all anyways. So essentially making their $250 million investment worthless.
Well, it hasn't actually been leaked on the internet yet, and this happened quite a while ago. So it seems as if it might not be, and so that technically they would have no loss there.
Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe somebody just wanted it for themselves.
Oh, yeah, yes, that was the clip at the end of the news story. But, if I hacked into Sony and all I got out of it was some Michael Jackson songs that were so bad they weren't released, I wouldn't be particularly
right. I mean, there's a reason they're probably not released, right? Exactly. I mean, they got to be probably redone.
But they also got tracks from other major names like Jimi Hendrix, Paul Simon, the Foo Fighters, and Avril Lavigne.
Well, I'm convinced, Alan. These hacks are bad for our economy, and we got to crack down on these guys like that.
Well, specifically, the hack occurred shortly after the PSN breach back in April of 2011, but wasn't announced until just now.
Are you serious? Are you screwing with me right now?
No.
God,
so Sony? Because the files were never leaked, Sony managed to keep this a secret until now.
How did it come out then? I mean, why did they even say anything?
Well, two of the alleged attackers were arrested in Britain back in May, but they were taken to court last week.
Sony is I mean, they had a bad year. They had a real bad year. I mean, they got hacked. What? Yes. All because you think it really all just got kicked off because of that firmware issue and taking away Linux on the PS3? I mean, is that really what got them in the target of all these hackers?
Possibly, but it's the fact that we talked about some of the software they were running and the fact that it was years and years out of date, right? People don't need a reason to hack you when you're, when your admin password is Stratfor or when your version of SSH is older than the hacker. But this relates back to the FBI's controlling of LulzSec. One of the other things they did was make Sabu post things on Twitter and in these interviews discrediting some of the claimed hacks. because when the hackers broke into certain companies and just poked around but didn't actually steal anything or destroy anything, that cost the company a lot of money and especially their reputation, right?
Right.
So the FBI was directing him to basically discredit those attacks to not, for example, hurt the share value of the companies. Right. And so, I can expect that was part of Sony's reasoning for not wanting to talk about the fact they got broken into again around the time of the PSN hack.
Make sure you don't hurt their share price. I mean, yeah, their customers should probably be told, but we don't want their stock to go down.
It seems that the FBI was a little too interested in Sony's stock price. There's another thing I've missed in the previous story.
I mean, hacking has FBI, become big business, hasn't it? I mean, hacking is big business now.
It is. But LulzSec, if you remember, was running a denial of service attack, or I don't think it wasn't just LulzSec; it was all of Anonymous, I think, against the CIA's website.
Yeah,
which really doesn't do any damage. Their website is completely isolated.
I know that kind of thing just is so childish. Well,
it's childish, stupid, and it's embarrassing for the CIA. So the FBI basically forced Sabu to try to talk them out of it and be like, stop kicking the hornet's nest, and so on. And apparently he was able to persuade them to cease their attacks against the CIA's website.
The Stratford, you go ahead and do that. Yeah. Just saying, Alan. It's fishy, that's all. But I'm sure it's just my limited understanding. Any other thoughts on that story?
It's hard to say. Not that much. It was just that it was interesting that the hackers didn't actually publish their dumped files.
Yeah. Maybe. Well, you said they were arrested, so maybe that's why.
They were arrested in May, so that's pretty close. But it seems like if you get that, you drop it on Pirate Bay the next day, right?
Can I ask you, have you looked for it? Maybe it's out there.
No.
So you and I just haven't been searching for this music. It might be there. It could be up on Pirate Bay for all we know. All right, Alan, well, this next story is breaking the industry apart. It is tearing communities. The security of this has such wide-reaching impacts on our daily use that we want to report to you immediately here on TechSNAP. Alan, take it away. What's our next story?
There's a security design flaw in libVTE, which is a virtual terminal emulator, which causes it to write your terminal's scrollback buffer to disk.
That's right, folks. There you go.
So if you're using any terminal that's based on libVTE, which includes GNOME terminal, XFCE4 terminal, and like 6 or 8 other ones.
Hold on, I think some people might have lost their breath. Give them a chance to catch up.
But basically what it does is it stores your scrollback buffer so that you can scroll back in a plain text file in /TMP.
Oh, yeah, sure, right? That makes sense.
Which is, could be read by other people at some point. Now, if you're using that terminal and doing something, or, and it's getting logged, or if you're, the worst case though is where you're starting up a terminal and then SSHing into a secure machine and doing something secure, and unbeknownst to you, all of that is being recorded on your local hard drive.
Right. I just want to make it clear, the chat room thinks I was being serious. I wasn't being serious. I mean, it sucks. This is a bad security bug, but I wasn't being so serious about the other stuff.
So basically, the vulnerability was introduced by a change in the software September 17th of 2009.
Huh.
So if you have GNOME and your /TMP is a regular disk partition, which is a default unless you use something like TMPFS, your hard drive is probably full of your session history from your terminal going all the way back to 2009.
Right, and of course, because it's, I guess it's good that's out there. There's even demo videos of guys doing it. Like, no, really, it really does this. Honestly, it just kind of seems like an innocent mistake by the developers.
Well, no, it was a design decision.
Oh, really?
And they're still, at this moment, refusing to change it.
No kidding. Well, then they should at least try to do some way to make the file private, like some sort of encryption or something, I would think.
Well, KDE's terminal console does some, it's not encrypted, but it's just obfuscated when it does the same thing. But really, the issue was that originally that scrollback buffer was stored in memory. But then people wanted really, really long scrollback buffers, right? And so they're like, all right, we'll have to put it in a file. Of course, now most people have more than enough
exactly.
memory. If you need a giant scrollback buffer, buy some more RAM.
I mean, I get that this is used on some low resource, like XFCE is kind of designed to be low resource. I grok that. But, I mean, even a low-end system has 256 megs of RAM, could easily store
a lot of text.
Yeah.
Well, and by default, your terminal window there only has a scrollback buffer of like 500 lines. It's only really comes into play when you edit it and set it to a really high value. But honestly, I'm using Windows 6. I have 70 odd putty sessions open, each with a 20 or 30,000 line scrollback buffer, and some of those are full and is only using like 20 megabytes of RAM each. So
when I was being a jerk and saying it was tearing communities apart, are people actually getting upset that the developers are being like, meh, not our problem?
Well, the one developer's like, well, I'm just not working on it anymore.
That sucks, because it's used in a few terminal applications. That sucks.
Yes. Well, it's something that could be fixed downstream instead of upstream. Or someone upstream could take it over or whatever.
Si, senor.
But so what happens and why nobody probably noticed this before, so when libvte starts up, it creates a file /tmp named vte dot and then something random. But then it immediately unlinks that file, which is basically the same as doing like an RM on it, right? Because the operation is actually called unlink, because it's not actually removing the file or the data. It's just removing the link between that file name and the IDO number on the disk, right? So that removes the file from the file system, so it doesn't show up when you do /ls or ls or anything. However, the file handle is still open, right? Because it hasn't closed it yet. So libvte can write your scrollback buffer into this file and read it back from there. But the file doesn't show up in the file system.
I see. I see.
Except for now, anybody that can read that disk can see your scrollback history. And because it's doing it basically in slack space like that, it's not necessarily going to overwrite the same spot every time. It's going to keep, your disk will usually attempt to fill up every sector and then go back and overwrite the oldest data. So that means that, there could be all kinds of sensitive information from your terminal sessions from even a long time ago stored there.
Right. Yeah, I suppose so, huh? Yeah. Well,
but the main issue is that the users are unaware that this is happening, right? It's basically everything you do is being logged and you're not being told about it.
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to put it. I mean, it's sort of the default behavior of all terminal windows. Although
most would just store it in memory and have a limited size to the buffer.
True. Right. They wouldn't.
This one's like, well, if you want an unlimited buffer, we're just going to stick it in a file. But then they made that the default.
Well, so I thought this was an interesting story. I'll probably be talking about it on the Linux Action Show this week, which is going to be a big show. Everybody needs to tune into Linux. I don't normally interrupt the show to say this, but we have a really, really great guest lined up. We haven't announced it just yet for Sunday, so people need to watch the Linux Action Show. It's going to be a really big show. It's our 200th episode too.
Yeah, it's
episode 200. And so we twisted a few arms and we got somebody everybody's going to want to tune in to listen to. Anyways, moving forward from that, I guess the main issue here is that it's being written to that Slack space, so your average user isn't going to be able to notice it. And that's probably the route that the developer's line of thinking is going, right? Is that 80% of people are never even going to know it's there. 90% of people are never going to know those files are there.
Basically, if you don't know that it's happening, you might, figure that, all right, there's nothing sensitive on this machine. I can just let someone else have access to it, or I can just sell this used hard drive.
Yeah, well, totally with the used hard drive thing, especially for servers.
Yeah, exactly. The important thing here is that people didn't know that this was happening.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And everything you do is logged, and you don't know it. That's not.
I concur.
Good situation.
And what I think is interesting is Ubuntu has announced in Ubuntu 12.04, they're going to include a privacy setting where you can go in and manage your privacy settings for the Ubuntu operating system. And one of the things it does is it goes out and deletes your .bash history file and clears those kinds of things out. And so it's an interesting concept. I've never thought of it in terms of privacy, because to me, those things are all utilities. I like having all that stuff. Myself, I like having my history. I like having my scrollback log. A lot of times, if my terminal gives me the option, I log out to a file. To me, that's useful data to have, especially.
But when you're actively doing that and you know that file is there, it's good, right? A lot of times it is what you want. But when it's happening when you don't know it, that's not good.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. All right, dude.
Like,
Well,
for example, if you happen to maybe edit your shadow file, right? You run VIPW and you're going to edit something.
Mhm.
Now all the password hashes for all the users on your machine are in your scrollback buffer.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
And if other people can read that, that's bad.
Yeah, yeah. And especially all that ASCII porn, that'd be in my scrollback buffer too, and I wouldn't want people seeing that. Yeah, that's a good point, Alan. You know what? It's a good thing that I watch TechSNAP. That way I am current on all these types of important matters.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it.
All right, let's take a pause here and say thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP. They are always rocking the support for independent media broadcasters, and I want to say thank you again for doing that, GoDaddy. Now, we have a deal. You see right there, .co's normally go for $30. I'm not S-ing you, $30, because these are specialized domains and they're new, and they're being snapped up really fast. Well, good news, if you want to grab a .co for a crazy great price, we have a code for you. If you use the code at checkout, COFEB8, C-O-FEB8, all one word, you get a .co for $7.99. So check it out. Like if you wanted to do TechSNAP is amazing, and you could do .com. I mean, you could, sure, but do .co. Let's see if TechSNAP is amazing .co. Is that taken? I hope not. Oh, huh. It's available. Well, that's a little disappointing. Well, let's say you wanted to get something else. Maybe TechSNAP is incredible.co. Use our code there. Also, if you're thinking you're going another route, but you want to get free private registration, which Alan and I are always big proponents of getting, we've got a code for you only for this month. If you use the code March 8, March 8, one word, you get free private registration. That's a $10 value because usually it costs you $10 to do that. Look, we've got a bunch of other codes in the show notes where you can get deals on hosting and all kinds of stuff, including some codes that just give you general discounts on depending on what you're buying. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, check out the TechSNAP 48 show notes, and we'll have them listed there. And thank you to GoDaddy.com for not just supporting TechSNAP, but for supporting the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. And thank you to everyone out there who says thanks to GoDaddy and checks out some of their services. All right, Alan, what do you think? Should we move right along?
Yep.
All right, then. That means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Welcome to the TechSNAP feedback, and thank you for sending your questions or episode feedback to TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com or submitting them to our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. I don't know why I always have a brain fart right before I read that. All right, so we're going to do something a little different. This week, we're going to read a question, and then we're going to answer that. Like, that's not so different. But then it's a war story, and then we'll wrap with one more question and answer. So are you ready, sir?
Yep.
All right, Alan, the first question on this week's show comes from Sean, a.k.a. Jungle Boogie, in the IRC chat room. I don't think he's in there today. He writes, I would love to hear your best policies and practices with SSH. I think this is coming off something we talked about like last week. Alan says it's best not to allow root login. I've heard of deny host, but don't understand how it's different from fail to ban. Should you limit SSH login to a particular IP address or net block for additional precautions, or would that be a mistake likely to cause an issue? In Linux, how would you disable root login? Looking forward to any wisdoms of Alan and Chris. So what do you think, Alan?
Yes. First of all, yes, you should disable root login, but not until you've set up so other users can log in first.
Right, and make sure they can do like su and sudo if you need it.
Right, yes. So you want to set up your regular or certain user accounts to be able to use sudo or su to gain access to root. And then in your SSHD config file, there's a line that says permit root login. And if you set that to no, then root won't be able to log in once you restart SSH.
Right.
Now, you have some good links in the show notes on instructions on how to do that in Ubuntu and so forth.
Yeah.
And because OpenSSH is software from the OpenBSD project, it's the same on every version of BSD and every version of Linux.
Yeah, so there's the line you put in the SSH config right there if people just want to grab that. And that right there is a great step.
Yep. But then the other thing, the document talks about other things like disabling passwords altogether, meaning you have to use an SSH key to log in, which can be good, although sometimes you don't always have your key depending where you are. Like, for example, I don't disable, I use my key to log in, 99% of the time. But if I'm somewhere else, at a client location or something, and I need to log in for a second, I might not have my key, and I don't want to stick my key in their computer necessarily. So,
right. Yeah.
Sometimes you still want to have passwords enabled. And the general consensus behind the idea of disabling passwords is to prevent those bots that are attempting to break into your server. But that's not the right solution, right? You're not stopping the bots from trying to break into your server. You just make it impossible for them to succeed. Right? So instead, what you want to do is set up something like deny host or fail to ban. Or actually, the one I prefer is SSH guard. So what these do is they watch your log files for failed logins. Now, something like deny host, what it does is it creates basically a host.deny file, which is for TCP wrappers, which is a common library a lot of things from inetd and things like OpenSSH can use. And it basically has a list of hosts that are allowed and not allowed to connect or log in. So the configuration is a little bit different depending on your OS, but the deny host package for your OS will be tuned the right way. Because, for example, it's different under OpenBSD, FreeBSD, and Linux. But so it's all set up for you. And basically, what it allows you to do is it watches the log file, sees when someone is logged in too many or failed to log in too many times. You can adjust the settings yourself, and then it would basically block that user's IP. Now, the difference between a couple of these different ones is with deny hosts, you basically add that IP to a list of hosts that are not allowed to connect. So when the user connects on port 22, they will just get disconnected immediately. That's the behavior of TCP wrappers. With fail to ban, it will actually add rules to your IP tables firewall. So that will block them completely, and they'll just time out rather than getting connected and disconnected.
And I could see how you could run into some trouble with that, but as long as you're careful with the configuration.
Yeah, both of those are fine. And then something like SSH guard, it's a little more advanced. It considers multiple vectors. It can also protect things like your mail server, POP3 and IMAP and so forth. And it's because it's a little more configurable and dynamic, you can choose between a bunch of different firewalls.
Oh, that's nice.
Because on BSD, there is no IP tables.
Yeah, right.
On BSD, you have to pick between IP filter, PF, and IPFW. But SSH guard works with all three of those, and I'm pretty sure it does IP tables and a few other ones as well. So it allows you to...
That's pretty handy.
That one's basically, it's based on a threat level. So how dangerous the attack is determines how long something is banned for, and so on.
I like that. So that might be a little less of a sting, too, if you accidentally ban yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're doing something that doesn't look very dangerous,
right,
or the pattern doesn't look very dangerous, you get banned, but only for 20 minutes instead of forever.
Yeah, that'd probably be,
with my deny host, the default is after you fail to log in 5 times, you're banned for like a week, which, can be an issue. Or I think actually you're banned for a day, and if you get banned 4 times, you're banned forever. Or something to that effect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing that deny host has is a distributed option, where all the other people that are running deny hosts can choose to send the list of hosts that they block back to a central server.
Oh, that's nice.
And then you can download that list and end up blocking people before they come out and hit you. The disadvantage is if you actually block yourself and you publish that out in the list and you block yourself from all over the internet, that might be an issue.
Right.
Or it's something that, someone postulated that someone could do that as an attack against you. So they know that you run deny hosts on your machines. So they set up a whole bunch of machines across the network and insert fake log entries saying your IP is attempting to hack into their server until they get your IP banned by the deny host distributed monitoring system because, 20 different people reported that you were trying to hack into them. And now you're banned from your own box.
Yeah, it says here they have 165,000 active subscribers to the deny host service.
I mean, because that's off by default, so that's only people that opted in.
Yeah, that's a pretty good amount. That you definitely would get somebody who's doing a lot of. So you got to figure somebody if there's some big thing going on.
It's infected computers in China and so on, and so
then they could be doing entire ranges. It's going to flag somebody on that.
Yeah, because
cool.
So that's why it's important to be blocking them with this rather than just disabling password authentication and letting them continue to pound away at your machine. is because by default, your SSH setup will only take about 20 active connections at once, depending on your settings. And so if the bots are using all 20, that leaves none for you and you can't log into your machine. You'll get an error every time you try to log in.
Si, senor. That's true.
That'll probably go away when the bots move on to the next machine or whatever, and you'll be able to get in. But, being unable to get in even for a couple minutes is really annoying.
You're not kidding.
Or, if they do it on purpose, they could, a distributed denial of service attack against your SSH so that you can't log in to fix your machine.
Right. God, it's awful. That'd be the worst. That's the worst.
In your links that you included, there's some talk about how to set up rate limiting per IP address and some other stuff as well.
So there you go. So, Alan, are you ready for the war story?
Yep.
Now, this was submitted by the other Alan again, and it takes place back in 1996, in October, if I am led to believe correctly, Alan.
Yes.
Called this one, by the way, I call this one a retro war story.
Yes.
All right, so what happens?
Yes, this is like, back then I was still on my very first computer.
96? Jeez, I don't remember. Yeah, I definitely was probably on...
I got my first computer in about 95, and then around 96 is when I got Windows 95 for that computer.
My first computer was a Mac that I got really early on because my mom was a graphic artist. But my first PC I built, and I think I got it probably around 95 after my dad got a new computer. That's what it was. My dad got a new computer for Windows 95, and he bought a few extra parts, and I built myself basically a minier version of what he got with his help.
Nice.
That was like a father-son moment. In fact, the only time we ever built computers together was probably that time. But it was a lot of fun. But that was a long time ago. Computers were very different back then.
Yep. I didn't know how to build them back then.
Well, I had a guide, so I was thankful. Yeah.
So anyway, October 1996. So Windows 95 was basically relatively new and quite popular because, it was multitasking, which you couldn't do in Windows 3.1. That was a big change.
True. Yeah.
It's like, what? I can have two things running at once? And
the whole user interface completely changed. It was when you saw the introduction of the start menu and the taskbar, a lot of that, the task tray, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff. So Irish had just accepted a job at a PC retailer. So he realized that his chemistry degree was not going to get him a job that he would actually want to do.
Yeah.
So he did some training in electronic engineering and was building and testing emergency light systems and things like that.
Huh.
But then he saw the chance to turn his computer hobby into a job instead.
Yep. First mistake right there. Keep it a hobby. It's way more fun. Cynical.
Yeah, I know. The company wanted to build PCs and sell the PCs and handle repairs and that kind of thing. So it sounded like a good entry-level position to get him started in the industry.
Yeah, I understand.
So the company wanted to ramp up their sales for Christmas, and the demand was certainly there for PCs around that time.
Windows 95 launch was the biggest thing in Microsoft history. I mean, it was like an Apple event. You know how Apple can fart and everybody lines around the stores? That was how Microsoft was back then, and people literally lined around the block for Windows 95.
This is when computers are really starting to get to the point where anybody can use them, and software is more accessible, and the machines are less expensive. And
Microsoft worked closely with Compaq and Hewlett Packard to have new machines that were Windows 95 ready. So it was like this 1-2 punch combo. It was big.
Yep.
And probably IBM. Yeah.
So Irish proposed an expansion of their operation. So the retail unit had a very small workshop at the back, which is fine for one person to be working on a machine, but that was about it.
Yeah.
But there was a pharmacy next door that had a warehouse out back that they weren't using. So a couple weeks later, after the holidays, they managed to rent that space and move the system building operation into that warehouse.
Ooh, upgrade.
Yeah. So it took 7 or more people and put together a crash course in PC building.
Nice.
And basically, his basic idea was a production line where one guy would pull the cases out of the box and the packaging. And then the next guy would install the motherboard, and the next guy would hook up the drives and cables and so forth, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Keep it nice and efficient.
Yeah. So he had 2 lines like that set up, and then himself and another guy would do the quality control, which is, boot up the machine, make sure everything powers up, make sure it posts and everything, doing all that. Yeah. And then it was time to install the operating system. So the guy who owned the company decided that every machine should be preloaded with a vanilla Windows 95 install, which is, typical at the time.
Yeah.
And basically the fastest way that Irish found to accomplish that was, because his knowledge was quite limited at the time, was basically have a Windows 95 boot disk that loaded up, formatted the drive, made it bootable, and then using a parallel port zip drive to basically copy over a Windows 95 folder structure.
Wow, that was my method too. I called it Mr. Booter. That was my floppy disk name was Mr. Booter. I even made a little menu where I could say skip the format part. It was great. Yeah.
And it was basically taken from a pre-configured machine with identical hardware.
I wonder if he loaded Smart Drive. Mine loaded Smart Drive, and that made Windows 95 install way faster.
Yeah. And then in the document, he's lamenting, if he had known about drive cloning and imaging, sysprep, and that kind of stuff back then. Although I don't know that sysprep was quite mature enough
cloning
yet
was hit and miss back then too. Because I remember I was really beginning to experiment with cloning sort of around the Windows 98 days. Mm-hmm. So I think it was maybe a little early for cloning.
Yeah. But I do remember using sysprep for Windows NT and Windows 2000.
Definitely, yeah. But I don't know about 95.
Yeah, let's going back a little far. So anyway, the process worked quite well for them, and they were able to produce a new PC every 12 minutes, and then another 15 minutes to do the imaging and get the OS on it and everything.
That's not bad.
That's pretty quick, yeah. So that means one new computer ready for sale every 30 minutes. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Considering that Irish was a rookie and he was working with a bunch of Luddite minions. Assistants.
And it sounds kind of nice. Like it was like a nice, clean install of Win95, not loaded full of crap.
Right, yeah, not compared to what you would get from HP or Compaq at the time.
Right, exactly.
Preloaded with AOL and a bunch of other...
Remember how they would come loaded with every online service at once? CompuServe, AOL, MSN, and they'd all be fully installed, and they'd all want to act as your default web browser constantly?
Yes.
I hated that.
And then none of those actually work in Canada?
Oh, man. Well, they're just so annoying because they all required a subscription.
So they would have all of those installed, or sometimes they would also install the Canadian version on top of the American version.
Right.
So they were both there side by side.
Right.
But yeah, all the American ones wouldn't actually work in Canada.
And then I remember
they would try to work, and they would call an 800 number, and then you would get a bill for like $400.
Or a machine would come with Eudora Mail and Outlook Mail at the same time, and you'd just be like, come on, guys, really?
Yep.
Crazy. And the hard drives were smaller back then, too, so space was more limited.
Very small. Yeah.
So
my first Windows 95 machine had a 500 megabyte hard drive, and then a second 400 megabyte hard drive.
Yeah, my Mac had a 25 megabyte SCSI external hard drive that was, it was as thick as 2 textbooks put together, and loud, and that was a big deal. And then my biggest upgrade is I had a 250 megabyte hard drive later on, and I thought that was gonna be crazy. Yeah, it's pretty wild times. And back then, 200. What'd you say? 200 megabytes?
I had 500 and 400.
Wow, that's big.
For a 486, it was huge.
That's really big for back then.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was SCSI.
Yeah, and I had an external SCSI tape drive and external SCSI 1.7 times CD-ROM drive. Yes.
I remember when 2x and 4x speed CD-ROMs came out. That was great.
Yeah, but this one wasn't quite 2x. No. It was 1.7x.
Wow. All right, so let's continue on.
Yeah. So viruses is spent... they kept up the pace for a couple of months with a couple of tweaks and improvements. But then he clarifies when he cloned the original PC operating system, he had been told that the product key was a system builder key, which was good for 10,000 uses. He says, being a dumbass, naive geek who just wanted to make more computers and make them faster, I never questioned that point. So he said he even went as far as to have the key written in huge letters on a banner above the door to the side office.
Yeah, we had some of those sometimes. Oh boy, I know where this is going.
He says, in fact, that the serial number is still burned into his head, and he lists it here with a couple of the numbers X'd out.
It's funny. I have a buddy I could call up right now, and I could ask him to do the same thing, and he would just blah 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 right off the phone because we used it so many times. I
know one for Windows XP. The main pirated one was like RYHTT XKFKB 8 something.
Yeah, see, it's funny because you just have to enter it so many effing times.
Yeah.
That's funny. He must have been using Win95, the second edition, because I don't believe the first edition came with long, complicated OEM codes. In fact, there was a brief moment in time with NT where you could actually just do like 1111, or there was some very simple numeric number pattern you could enter in just to pass right by it. Yep. So that was good times back then. But way before activation, that's for sure.
So he says the fun began when it turned out that over the course of a highly successful and prolific sales of computers, they had actually apparently sold one to someone who actually worked for Microsoft. So the guy was apparently going around from store to store all over the country and purchasing computers to see if they came with a proper license. So one frosty day in April, some Microsoft suits and some police officers showed up at the retail office, which is just a little ways away from their warehouse where they were building the machines, and announced that they were raiding the operation under suspicion of software piracy.
What? Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, that sucks.
Yeah. So the warehouse was about a 5-minute walk from the office. So when the raiders were walking over, the office rang the warehouse and told them what was happening.
Warning, guys, warning.
Yeah. So Irish says it was time to think fast or to run.
Yeah, run.
So I figured my brain moves faster than my body. So he sits still and put his gray matter to work for a short amount of time. So there were about 14 PCs on a wooden pallet at the door ready to go out for sale. And but it dawned on him that those computers had been packaged back in the original case that just in the box that the case had come in. Right?
Sure.
I don't know about you, but I always do that.
Yeah, because it's the only box that's big enough to hold everything.
Perfectly. And the foam blocks fit. It's perfect.
Yep.
So what he did was he took all those computers that were back in the original boxes from the case, and he moved them back from the end to the start of the production line so that they looked like another pile of computer cases ready to be assembled.
Oh my gosh, that's actually pretty clever.
Yeah. He says, I grabbed my lunch and hopped on top of the pile of PCs and acted like I was on my break. So he's sitting on top of a pallet of computers.
That's pretty brilliant, actually. That's not bad. That's not bad, sir. Not bad.
So a minute or so later, the raiding party with the police accompaniment arrives and presents their warrant to search the warehouse. So I told them that they should have at it and look around and
sure. Don't mind me. I'm just eating a sandwich.
Yeah, I just sit. So I just stayed on my seat to watch and observe. So one of the suits grabbed a few computers from the quality control office there and asked for one of the helpers to hook up a monitor so they could check the computer. And the computer powers on and it posts and then displays a black screen saying there's no OS installed, right? Because they hadn't got to that. Those ones in the QA office were being tested before the OS was put on them. So the suit looks, quite perplexed by this. And he went through every PC in the stack outside the room. And over the course of an hour or so, every single one of them didn't have Windows on it.
That's a close call.
So then he consulted his companions and decided to question Irish about the computers. And I explained that we would build them and then test them in the quality control room and then send them up to the retail office to be sold. I told him that sometimes the hard drives were refurbished and that they might contain old data that we didn't bother to reformat.
That's not a bad one.
As the owner of the company was such a damn slave driver that they just had to get the computers done as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, time is money.
Yeah. So there was a bit more questioning, but for the most part, the guy looked genuinely disheartened by not finding any pirated Windows at the shop here. So afterwards, when Irish was thinking about it, he was kind of expecting the guy to have a Geraldo Rivera with the Al Capone safe kind of scenario. So he's probably bragged about the fact that he had busted this huge pirate operation.
Right.
And now, it had fallen on its face and he made him look quite bad.
That's great.
Yeah. So he apologized for the inconvenience, thanked me for my cooperation, shook my hand, and left.
Oh, isn't that nice?
So Irish jumped down off the pile of computers and saw him and his companions and their police escort off the premises. The ideal was over, and we'd escaped, with quite a bit of luck.
Yeah, you know what you call that? You know what you call that? You call that the "it's time for a new job" moment. That's what you call that.
He gets that in a second. Right? So every time the guy walked into the quality control room, all he had to do was look up to see the pirated key banner right above the door. But he never looked up.
Oh, no kidding, right?
Yeah. If he had looked up, looked where he had been sitting and gotten slightly curious as to why I was just sitting on a crate of boxes, they would have been completely screwed.
I guess that guy was just not paying very close attention.
Yeah. Suffice to say, nobody noticed, and he got away with his deception. He says he immediately started looking for his next job in the industry away from this particular style of business. Although I learned a valuable lesson: hiding in plain sight really is the best approach sometimes.
Wow, that was a close call. People get in big trouble for that kind of stuff. And I think probably back then it happened more often than not to those type of OEM people, because that kind of stuff was new. Those kind of rules and stuff were, and the whole having to do the code like that was all kind of new. So probably a lot of mistakes were made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, Alan, should we get to our last feedback question for the day?
Yep.
All right. This question comes from, I think you pronounce it Paolo. He asks, I use fiber to the home service to connect to the internet. My ISP owns a private fiber network, and it connects users to a limited number of routers with access to the internet, each assigned a different static IP address. Services like Skype and TeamViewer work, I guess, using some sort of universal plug and play. But by default, you don't have the option to freely forward ports. However, if you call them and ask them to enable port forwarding, they'll do it for free. And that's what I did last week. To my surprise, they now assigned me a static IP address. Are there any more security risks for connecting to the internet using a static IP? Now, this is an interesting question, because the way he phrases that to me, Alan, and he wasn't quite clear on this point, is it actually sounds like everyone in that fiber connected community is
going out through one master NAT router or something.
And they're all maybe on the same network, potentially.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if his description is correct or how that ISP is set up. But in general, there are certain things, most people that have like a cable connection, their IP isn't really static, but it usually doesn't change unless their MAC address changes or they lose their lease for more than a day or so.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have it for quite a while.
It's a lot of people's connections to the internet give them a fairly static IP address.
Yeah, mine, I think the one I've had for 3 months now.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you've had the one they used for the Skype call with me has been the same for like a year.
Oh, really?
I think so. 50 something and something.
Well, at least for 48 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, if he's all of a sudden has his computer having this static IP address directly, then there might be some considerations, right? If he was behind NAT before and he isn't now, when you have a direct IP address, you're going to, if you don't have a NAT router or a firewall between you and that, then a lot of scans and stuff are going to start hitting your computer.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not want that. So
totally.
So if he has a NAT router at his house that is getting this static IP address, then no, there's no additional security to worry about.
Right.
If not, he wants, a simple host firewall or a NAT router like that. But, most people have a NAT router at their house because they have more than one machine and they want to have them all connected to the internet. So in general, no, there's not really any more concern having a static IP address compared to a dynamic IP address.
Right.
Now, having a public IP address instead of a private IP address, there's a little bit more concern.
There you go.
Right? Your typical NAT firewall, because of the way NAT works, is acting as what's called a something packet inspection. What's it called?
Why I wasn't following. What part? Say again. I'll catch it. What was it?
Basically, what NAT is doing is when you connect out.
Are you talking about stateful packet inspection?
Stateful packet inspection.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. I couldn't think of it for a second.
Yeah.
Anyway, what it means is when you connect out, the response to that is allowed back in, but an uninitiated connection from outside is never allowed in unless you forward a specific port to allow that connection in.
Right.
So what that means is that people can't connect to you. You have to connect out to them, unless you forward a port to allow them to connect to a specific computer. Now, while that seems like a feature of NAT, it's actually a limitation. When a connection comes in on some random port to NAT, it doesn't know which of your computers to send it to. So it just ignores it. And that's what makes it different than a regular stateful packet inspection firewall that each machine would have a public IP and the firewall would be making decisions.
Right.
In NAT, it doesn't know what to do, so it does nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's acting as that kind of a firewall, preventing things from outside from connecting into you unless you connect out to them first, or if you forward a port.
I would say if he is on some sort of flat LAN with all of those other people in his community, he should get a pfSense box between him and them.
Possibly. It depends. If it's switched, then he would only get the stuff for his MAC address, and everybody wouldn't be able to pick up the broadcast. Like that's typically how the cable modem system works. Like I see the ARP requests, which are broadcast for everybody in my subnet, but I don't actually see their traffic.
That's true. Yeah.
But basically, so if it's switched, you would only see stuff, only broadcast and stuff destined for your MAC address would come down your switch port. But yeah, it depends how the setup is. But yes, if you don't have pfSense, or at least just your regular $40 NAT router, then you probably might want one of those. Yeah. Although I don't use one, I use a pfSense box. But
yeah.
Well, I use a FreeBSD box that I've built, but same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no real additional risk of having a static IP compared to a dynamic one, but having a public one compared to a private one means that you want to maybe have some kind of firewall, but your typical $40 NAT box is more than enough.
Yeah. All right, that's a good question though, because I wanted to kind of cover that, because I think that's something that some people have some thoughts of. As I think probably people who watch this show or listen to this show are probably more likely to be inclined to be the type of people that would want to have a server at home and potentially go down the path of having a static IP.
And a static IP helps you a lot there.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing with a static IP versus a dynamic means that you may be easier to track online because your address is the same all the time. For example, when I had a DSL connection, it used PPP over Ethernet, which basically meant I dialed the connection like an old-fashioned dial-up connection on my computer.
Yeah.
But I connected at high speed.
Yeah.
But what it also meant was that every time I hit disconnect, I could reconnect and get a different IP address.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And so I could
hated
do
that service.
Right. But well, the thing I liked about it at my house was if you plugged the modem straight into a switch, 4 different computers in the house could each connect separately and get a separate public IP address.
That's interesting. Huh, I never thought of that.
And it avoided the need to do port forwarding, and it just made playing games a lot easier.
Yeah, totally would, huh?
Yeah. But
that's an interesting perk.
Some cable modems have that ability, but most cable ISPs charge you extra for additional IP addresses.
Yeah.
And that's why you just buy a NAT router instead. But yeah, so having a static IP address means that you're more traceable, but not all that much more. Because basically they can't assume that 2 different transactions from the same IP address a month apart are the same person. There's a probability that there is, but it's not a certainty. And so, it's not quite the same.
Si, senor. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the feedback we have in this week's episode of TechSNAP. And you know what that means? It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make into the top of the show, but we still thought we should talk about. Might be follow-up from previous weeks, and are definitely links that we think you might want to go read on your own after the show. And they're almost always exclusively powered by our awesome subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan, are you ready for the first story in the Roundup this week?
Yes.
All right, take it, sir.
George Takei from Star Trek was helping Facebook debug some of their MySQL scaling issues.
Is this real?
Yes. So basically what happened was he noticed and reported to them that he was seeing inconsistent behavior when he would post, and there'd be millions of people looking at it. Like posts would disappear and reappear, and he would it would look like it wasn't there, so he'd post again and then it would be there twice, and a bunch of things like that.
Well, I guess he does have a lot of followers, doesn't he?
Because he has a lot of, and he's I don't know if anyone's noticed, but he's extremely active on the social networks right now.
Oh, is he? Oh, I haven't noticed.
Yeah, he seems to post a lot. The one I found quite humorous though was he had well, not all, but a bunch of the Dr. Seuss kids books retitled to what they're actually about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That could be funny.
it was quite funny.
Yeah.
You know, you remember the one with the flags and it keeps going higher or whatever? That was about the futility of the nuclear arms race.
Maybe.
Yep. Or the one that's being made in a movie next. I forget what it's called, but it's about the trees, saving the trees or whatever. And it's about the importance of environmental conservatism and industrialization and so on.
What do you suppose Green Eggs and Ham is about?
Preconceptions and how if you judge things before you know the facts.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally what it's about. It's totally what it's about.
Or Horton Hears a Who is about the problems with isolationism.
Is this really happening right now? The chat room's eating it up too. The chat room's got all kinds of ideas. That's great.
And you know, the Grinch is about commercialism and materialism.
Yeah.
And so on and so on.
Yeah, definitely.
They're quite good.
All right, you ready for the next story in the roundup?
Yep.
All right, the next one. Yours. This next one just kind of brought a smile to my face because Google was walking around like cock of the walk recently, flirting $1 million in front of anybody's face that they could hack Chrome. Well, guess what? The Pwn2Own, I guess you call it conference. Is it, or is it more like
event?
It's like who can eat the most hot dogs kind of event, right?
Contest then.
Yeah, contest. Anyways, so Pwn2Own contest was going on, and Chrome got hacked. Not only did Chrome just get hacked, but they actually broke out of Chrome's sandbox, which is also kind of another blow to Google. And I guess they did it in 5 minutes, so they obviously already had it ready to go.
They had it ready to go.
Totally,
just presenting it.
Dude, that's what for $1 million big ones.
Well, yeah, it's because like previous versions of this event, usually the bounty is like $10,000.
Yeah.
But Google's like, we're going to step it up to $1 million.
Yeah.
But they're Google. It's like always $1 million.
Now they might only get up to $60K depending on the hack. And Google was willing to pay for other browser vulnerabilities too. Like they just were giving out.
Yeah. Well, it's the general good.
Yeah.
The greater good.
All right. So the next story in the roundup's kind of an interesting one. I didn't even realize this was going on right now, Alan. In fact, I blew about an hour and a half this morning trying to dig up a few clips on this. But I guess apparently there's 2 different bills in the United States Senate right now dealing with how ISPs need to handle security infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I guess there's a Republican bill and a Democrat bill. And the Democrat bill is the one that sort of has more traction right now. And the ISPs are sort of coming together and saying, we do not like this bill. And I'm not even clear on the details of it, but I'll throw this story in the news roundup, so it's something we can start tracking here. But ISPs have sort of come together as a group and said, no new cybersecurity regulations are needed. And they're insisting, I guess this is actually to Congress, they said Congress should remove legal barriers to ISPs so that way we can share cyber threat information with each other and also with the government. They also said that ISPs, this is the group, and this group consisted of a lot of small ISPs, but also AT&T and Comcast and big boys too. They went on to say that ISPs have strong incentives to secure their networks and heavily invest.
They pay for the bandwidth they get used, and so
and it's their business,
right? And if you've looked at the requirements for peering with a lot of these, you have to have a 24/7 NOC that will work with them to mitigate attacks instantaneously, because that bandwidth costs money. And
they brought up an interesting point, Alan.
Most ISPs have an SLA that says they will have 0% packet loss within their own network and a certain performance to other networks. And any kind of cyber attack that degrades that needs to be solved immediately. So ISPs have lots of incentive to solve these problems themselves.
So they're already sort of self-regulating in this sense. And this is kind of the point. Now, this is coming from the Vice President of Internet Systems of Engineering at Comcast. He went on to say, I want to know what you think about this, Alan. Attempting to impose uniform cybersecurity solutions could actually be counterproductive. By enabling an attacker to crack a single solution. That's interesting.
Yeah, basically, if they're mandating that all ISPs buy a box from one certain vendor and install it, that's a really bad idea.
I mean, what he's saying here is they could put together one game plan and really then go after all the different ISPs.
Yes, but also, if you're one of those small ISPs, maybe you can't afford the $10 million boxes that Comcast is buying and AT&T are buying, right?
Right.
It basically, it's going to kill off the small ISPs by forcing them to buy this hardware that is arbitrarily expensive.
I wonder if it's because those hardware manufacturers are also Department of Defense contractors. Anyways, it's
that kind of stuff. That's what the regulation shouldn't tell you how to solve the problem.
Right. Especially when it comes to technology, because the regulators just don't understand it at all. Yeah.
And yeah.
Interesting to see the ISPs, who are often competitors, coming together like this, though, and trying to bring it to Congress.
Well, it's the same, there's similar, well, not similar, but there's a law being proposed in Canada that require all ISPs to basically record all of your activity and make that available. And it's like, if you're one of those smaller ISPs, you can't afford the infrastructure.
Yeah. Lamar Smith is working on users. Lamar Smith, the guy that was the co-author of SOPA, is also working on a bill like that for the U.S. So, win-win for both of us.
I think the bill in Canada only exists because of pressure from the U.S.
That just makes me warm and fuzzy. That's what that does. Yeah.
But there is a, yes, so our Minister for Public Safety, I think it is, Vic Tooze. So there's a campaign on Twitter called Tell Vic Everything. Where, since he wants to spy on everybody's internet usage, people just flood him with
let him know what you're doing,
lunch and so on Twitter. And it was quite funny.
That is funny. All right, well, why don't we move on to something else that I thought was kind of funny in the roundup? Yep. GitHub had a little security incident this last week, and some are saying this sort of highlights some issues with Ruby on Rails, or at least there's a Ruby on Rails problem. Now, I didn't follow this too closely, but what I understand is some dude went in there, and he first thing he kind of did to mess around was he created a timestamp. He created a project and gave it a timestamp.
You're missing a little bit of the context here.
Okay.
So basically, this guy found a vulnerability in Ruby on Rails with the way it does assignment of multiple variables.
Okay.
And he reported it to Ruby's on Rails, and it's up to individual developers to secure their application. It's not something that Ruby on Rails is going to do.
So that's why, and then he just went and did it on GitHub. Is that what happened?
Yes. So then he went to GitHub to the Ruby on Rails project and created a ticket. Was it 1,001 years in the future?
Yeah, he timestamped it for 1,001 years.
And then he gave his SSH key the ability to write to their repository and started committing code. Yeah. And basically to prove how big of a vulnerability this was in the Ruby on Rails language.
And then, of course, when GitHub found out, they shut his account down.
Until they could fix the problem. They fixed the problem and they give him his account back.
Yeah. Kind of a funny story, though. Because look, it really is a big deal.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Alan, well, the next story on the roundup. You know how sometimes every now and then we talk about the security of electronic voting on this show?
Yeah.
Well, this is a great story. It comes out of a school board in Washington, D.C. who had an election, and they were hacked, and Bender the drunken robot won the election. And here's the funny twist to the story. This system was actually sort of a pre-run for some actual real voting they were going to use for some sort of actual government function. And
exactly.
But they were the people who wanted to implement it were convinced to first do a trial balloon for the local school district board elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I love. This just blows me away. One of the ways the hackers got in and made it so that Bender the robot was the winner of the election is the engineers who set up the supposedly bulletproof voting system used the word admin for both the username and password of the servers holding the election information. On top of that, the election information was then stored into a single PDF file, so the attacker only had to just open up that PDF file and replace the names of the winners with the names that they wanted. And I just
what
think
the hell kind of a system is this?
Yeah.
Why is it should be cryptographically signed? And I don't know. See, the problem with doing a hardware solution like that is A, the admin password is a weak point.
Yep.
B, you can't do anything really cryptographic because the key would be stored on that machine, and the attacker, once they compromise the admin password, would have access to that key to sign a new version of the PDF file, therefore invalidating the fact that the PDF file has a signature.
Yeah.
It seems like you need, a double-blind system where there's multiple machines and all of them have to collude in order to make a fake result.
Well, and also the people who are claiming it's unhackable definitely have some egg on their face.
There's no such thing as unhackable.
No. All right, next story on the roundup. Kind of silly one.
Yes,
also kind of funny.
So a bunch of anonymous supporters who wanted to participate in denial of service attacks were Googling, I guess, to find the low orbit ion cannon, which is basically an opt-in botnet. It's a bit of software you run on your computer, and it makes you part of the anonymous botnet they use in those childish denial of service attacks. Don't do it. It's stupid. But a bunch of people that were looking for that instead found a clever malware guy who had basically rebranded a Trojan and made it trick these users into downloading this Trojan instead. and he used their computer to make money off malware and clicking on ads and that type of thing.
Now, Anonymous took their Twitter account. Anonymous took their Twitter account and said this was an untrue story. Do you believe them?
I believe there were some users that were definitely tricked into installing a Trojan. They were probably the not so bright ones.
Here's what they said. And by the way, if you notice, it is a Symantec report that calls this out. They say Symantec is butthurt over the source code leak, and so was doing this to get back at them.
So they're not saying that Anonymous did this.
Right. No, I know.
They're saying that a bunch of people that wanted to help Anonymous
and that's
were too stupid.
Right. They would
that's the entire point of the low orbit ion cannon. If you're too stupid to help, here, run this.
Well, and anybody could take a file and upload it to the web and claim they're anonymous. So, I mean, I get all that, but I just think it's funny that Anonymous was like trying to defend themselves on Twitter, taking to it and being like, that wasn't us.
Well, yes, nobody was claiming it was. Well, a bunch of newspaper probably were because they misunderstood the story.
I'm sure that's what it was.
The whole point was that someone that wasn't anonymous posted a Trojan claiming, use this click this file and it'll help Anonymous. And won't, right? It's that thing we talked about before, trend jacking, setting up your bit of malware to follow the latest trend. So if next week our story is about,
next week it's going to be Connie viruses. Everybody that's getting behind this KONY movement, you watch. Next week, there's going to be a whole bunch of malware around that.
What movement is this?
Well, you'll find out. You'll see it. You've been heads down working on the show this morning, but it's the only thing the entire internet is talking about today.
And I don't talk to the entire internet.
Good call, man.
I find most of them to be kind of silly.
Now, the last story in the roundup this week is just an awesome one for any of you out there who like the Super Nintendo and any of those old Nintendo games. The process has been underway for a while to actually, am I getting this term right, decap? I think that's what they call it, where they decap every transistor, scan it in line by line, and figure out how they can rebuild the Super Nintendo from scratch to have complete hardware emulation. And that effort is done, and there's actually some development Super Nintendo emulators that are hardware based now in the works that can play your old games. And I just thought that was really cool. I just want to throw that in the roundup. And there's some good pictures. So if you are listening to the audio version, go check out some of the hardware porn from the old Super Nintendo chips. Right?
Yep.
So thanks to everybody over at links.techsnap.tv who submitted these stories.
I have a last minute story to throw in the roundup.
All right, do it. Let's go.
So the director of the FBI yesterday warned Congress about terrorist hacking. He believes that while terrorists haven't yet hacked their way into the U.S. government, it is an imminent threat. To date, terrorists have not used the internet to launch a full-scale cyber attack, but we cannot underestimate their intent. And this seems to fit exactly with your, hypothesis that they're trying to use Anonymous as a scapegoat to gain additional powers.
Yeah. Well, so when I was digging around, I wanted some clips for the show so I could play them on air so we could see what what they're talking about with these ISP regulations they're trying to push through. And one of the things that I did hear, and I'll try to get a clip of it for you guys, is they're actually bouncing around the stat to underscore what you just read, that according to Symantec, there have been 3 billion, I guess they use the term cyber attacks or something like that. I gotta go get the clip.
Cyber security incidents, I think.
Right, and so there they
are.
Now,
if you remember from our talk with NASA last week, the number there was millions and millions, like 100 million.
Yeah, 54,000 it was 5,400 individual attacks or something like that, right? Something nuts.
But that was the attacks, but I'm talking about the actual incidents. It was in the millions.
Oh, right. But what do you classify as an incident? It all goes back to that.
Like the first one there that they classified was any malware gets on your computer.
Yeah, right.
Well, that happens a lot.
So you're getting down. I think where you're going off track there, though, is that you're getting down in the details of the actual discussion. You're actually going the logic route, but the problem is they're actually on the floor using that number, and they're not defining what it means. They're just saying 3 billion hack attempts. Yeah. And so you have that going on at the same time that you have them releasing statements like that, and this massive publicity over this LulzSec bust. They're building towards something.
Exactly.
It's freaky. And we'll cover it.
It means that they've been planning it for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll just keep covering it, and as it comes out, we'll just keep giving our analysis of it. That's all you can do, I guess, at this point, right?
I mean, fight the FUD.
Yeah. So thanks to everybody that submitted over at links.techsnap.tv. We need some people to submit a Hall of Shame for next week. And remember, we need everybody to vote. Although we got some great voting this week with all of the anonymous stuff going on and stuff. Some people are active in the Reddit. That was really cool.
Cool.
But TechSNAP is live Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Nice, sir. And you can also stream us live over at jblive.am if you're on the go or sitting at your desk or something like that. And then, of course, you can just download this show Friday morning in just about any format you could ever possibly want it. Alan, great show, sir. And I'll see you next week.
Yep, you too.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you next week.